When Thomas died, the silence in our home wasn't peaceful. It was cavernous. Like the walls themselves recoiled from me, unsure of what to do without his presence. I didn't sleep in our bedroom for weeks. Couldn't. Every creak in the floor felt like a cruel echo of what used to be. Our boys, Caleb and Jonah, clung to me like little barnacles, their faces confused and scared, too young to understand why Daddy wasn't coming back. Grief was supposed to be mine. Mine to carry, to navigate, to survive. But I soon realized I wasn't just mourning a husband. I was preparing for a war. The day after the funeral, my parents, my own parents, offered to help. Help with the boys. Help with the bills. Help sorting through the house, they said. It all sounded kind and reasonable, and in my fog of pain and exhaustion, I didn't think twice. I handed over a spare key. Told them I trusted them. That was my first mistake. I didn't notice right away. Grief dulls your senses. It makes you forget what normal even looked like before everything broke. But one evening, about 3 weeks later, I came home from picking up Jonah from daycare to find the living room stripped. Our vintage record player, Thomas's pride. The leather-bound books he loved. Even the photo albums. Gone. Just gone. I thought maybe they were being cleaned or restored or, I don't know, preserved. My mom gave me a tight-lipped smile when I asked. "Oh, sweetie," she said. "We sold a few things. You're going to need the money, and most of that stuff just reminded you of him anyway." I remember blinking at her, trying to process. "You sold them?" Her smile didn't move. "It's for the best." I was too stunned to scream. But that was only the beginning. I found out a week later, through a bank notification I'd stupidly never thought to double-check, that the education fund Thomas and I set up for the boys had been drained. Completely. $82,000. Gone. The account had my parents listed as joint custodians, a technicality from when we opened it that I never thought to change. I confronted them. This time, I did scream. My father didn't even flinch. "Your husband left you in a mess," he said. "You weren't thinking clearly. We did what needed to be done." I was shaking. "That money was for Caleb and Jonah." He shrugged. "And now it's been invested in something better." What the hell does that mean? But they wouldn't tell me. Just kept repeating that I should be grateful they were stepping in. That I was fragile. That I couldn't handle things alone. They underestimated me. I didn't fall apart. Not in the way they expected. I spent the next few nights in the basement, digging through boxes, filing cabinets, every drawer and record we'd ever kept. I found copies of the original fund contracts. Letters Thomas had written. Notes scribbled about the passwords to his old accounts. And then I found something that stopped my heart cold, a sealed envelope addressed to me, marked only with a single word in his handwriting, "If." Inside was a letter. Not long, but clear. He'd always worried, he said, that my parents resented him. That their interest in our family wasn't love, but control. He'd added a clause to our will, one only his lawyer and I had access to, that ensured any misuse of funds connected to our children would trigger a legal override. I had no idea what that meant, but I would soon. The next morning, I called the lawyer. His voice got real quiet when I told him about the drained account. "I wondered if I'd hear from you," he said. "You need to come in. Today." When I arrived, he handed me a flash drive, a copy of the amended will, and a contact number for someone I'd never heard of. "This is where things get interesting," he said, and leaned in. "Because technically, your husband created a trust fund for the boys in Belize. That account? That $82,000? That wasn't all the money. It was just the visible part." I blinked at him. "What?" "There's more," he said. "A lot more." I left that office shaking. But it wasn't from fear. It was the first time I'd felt fire in my chest since Thomas died. Real heat. Real purpose. That night, while my parents were sleeping peacefully in their suburban fortress, I made a plan. I would take back what they stole. All of it. But first, I would make them regret ever thinking I was weak. They say grief clouds your judgment. Maybe that's true. But revenge? Revenge sharpens it. It focuses every breath, every step, every sleepless hour into something crystalline. Something lethal. I didn't tell my parents what I knew. Not yet. I let them believe I was broken, still stumbling through widowhood, still too fogged by sadness to be a threat. I dropped hints about struggling with bills, feigned desperation. And they lapped it up. "We can help manage things," my mother said sweetly one afternoon, sipping tea in my kitchen like she hadn't gutted my life for profit. "You focus on the boys. Let us worry about the rest." I nodded. Smiled even. Thank you. I don't know what I'd do without you. Inside, I was building a case. With the help of Thomas's lawyer, Daniel, a silver-haired bulldog with a love for loopholes, I started tracing every transaction. The $82,000? Gone into shell companies. But one of them was registered under my father's name. Sloppy. The kind of arrogant mistake that comes from believing you're untouchable. You have enough here, Daniel told me, to not only press charges, but take them for everything they're worth. But that wasn't what I wanted. Not yet. See, I didn't just want them to pay, I wanted them to feel it. To know the exact moment their house of lies started crumbling. And I wanted it to come from me. So I waited until my father's 60th birthday party. It was a full affair, tuxedos, catered lamb, champagne flutes clinking like some twisted orchestra. I brought the boys, dressed in their little suits, and played the grieving but grateful daughter like a symphony. My mother hugged me in front of their friends and whispered, "See? You're surviving because of us." I didn't flinch. Just smiled. And then, when the speeches started, I asked for the mic. There was a hush, respectful, expectant. I was the widow, after all. The single mother. The one they'd rescued. I cleared my throat, smiled at my parents, and said, "Before I begin, I have a little something I'd like to show everyone. A gift. For my father." The projector behind me clicked on. First, photos. The living room before and after. The items they sold, pictures of listings online, dated. Then, the bank statements. Highlighted. Annotated. A transfer to Elmgate Consulting, a company traced directly to my father's office address. Gasps. Shifting in seats. My mother's face drained to ash. Then I dropped the real bomb. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice steady, "what you're seeing is fraud. Criminal, actually. A theft of funds meant for my children's future, committed not by strangers, but by the very people who claim to love us most." A pause. "And here's the best part, Thomas knew. He saw it coming. And he planned for it. So as of this morning, legal proceedings have begun to seize all assets held under Elmgate Consulting, and a cease and desist order has been filed against both my parents." My mother stood then. "You can't do this." I met her eyes. "I already did." The room erupted. Guests whispering, someone dropping a glass. My father lunged toward the projector, yanking cords out of the wall. But it was too late. The truth was loose. And I wasn't finished. I leaned forward, calm as ever. "You thought I'd fall apart. That I'd let you run my life just because I was alone. But I'm not alone. I have my boys. I have Thomas's voice in my head. And now? I have your attention." I left before dessert. The boys were already in the car, sleepy and unaware of the earthquake that had just begun. And the next morning? That was when the real storm hit. The financial advisor my parents used dropped them, quietly, politely, but permanently. Their community board memberships? Revoked. Too much noise. And then the story started spreading. Not just from me, but from others they'd wronged over the years. Employees. Neighbors. People who'd been waiting for someone to finally knock them off their high horse. They thought the worst part was public embarrassment. It wasn't. It was the letter they received 2 weeks later. From Belize. See, Thomas wasn't just paranoid. He was brilliant. That offshore trust fund? It had clauses that rerouted funds based on legal interference. And now that my parents had tampered with it, the remaining money, over $300,000, was sealed in a new account. Accessible only to me. Not as Thomas's widow, but as the sole legal guardian of Caleb and Jonah. I stared at the balance for a long time, tears spilling down my cheeks. Not because of the money, but because he had believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. But the war wasn't over yet. Not completely. Because I still had one loose thread to pull, and it was woven deep in the shadows of Thomas's past. A name that had come up more than once during the investigation. A business partner he had quietly cut ties with. A man who once told Thomas, "Your wife's too strong-willed. She'll ruin everything." His name was Mark Holloway. And according to a file I found in Thomas's safe, Mark wasn't just a business partner. He was family. I hadn't heard the name Mark Holloway in years. Thomas barely mentioned him, and when he did, it was in the kind of tight-lipped, careful tone he reserved for old scars that never quite healed. "We were close once," he'd said. "But he's not someone I trust anymore." I never asked for details. I figured it was just business. But now, holding the file Thomas had hidden behind our wedding album, it was clear, Mark wasn't just business. He was blood. Half-brother. Same father, different mother. A messy inheritance dispute when they were in their 20s had split the family down the middle. Thomas never told me everything, but the bitterness had lingered. I assumed it was over. I should have known better. Inside the file was a handwritten letter from Thomas, dated 2 months before his death. If something happens to me, look into Holloway. He's not finished. The rest of the letter was cryptic. Mentions of investments redirected. Legal language I didn't quite understand. And a scanned copy of something called the Holloway Clause, tucked inside a manila folder marked private in red ink. I took it to Daniel. His eyes widened the moment he saw it. "Oh boy," he muttered, sitting down. "You're sitting on a landmine. What does it mean?" "It means," he said, flipping through the pages, "that if Mark Holloway ever attempted to claim assets connected to Thomas's business portfolio, a failsafe would trigger. One that redirects all investments to a designated third party. Namely, you." I blinked. "But I don't own any of Thomas's business." Daniel gave a small, knowing smile. "Not yet. Turns out, after Thomas and Mark split ways, Thomas quietly retained control over a significant stake in the company they'd co-founded. It wasn't public, not even active, but it existed, hidden beneath layers of shell corporations and silent partners. And 2 weeks after my parents' public downfall, Mark Holloway tried to claim those shares. He filed a motion in court, alleging that as next of kin, he was entitled to all remaining assets under the company's umbrella. I wouldn't have known if Daniel hadn't flagged it. But because of the Holloway Clause, the motion triggered an automatic asset freeze. I now had legal leverage over a man who once told my husband that a strong wife is a dangerous thing. And I intended to use it. I flew to Chicago for the meeting. Mark's office was glass and steel and sharp edges. He greeted me with a smile that didn't touch his eyes. "So you're the widow," he said, extending his hand. I didn't take it. "Let's get this over with." He leaned back in his chair, cocky. "You know, your husband made a lot of promises he couldn't keep." "Funny," I said. "So did you." His smirk faltered when I pulled out the document and laid it on the table. "This is what you triggered when you tried to claim his shares." He snorted. "Some dusty clause in a dead man's will? You think that'll stop me?" "No," I said, sliding over a second folder. "This will." Inside, a timeline of every shady deal he'd tried to sweep under the rug. Backdoor contracts. Quiet payouts. A non-disclosure agreement with a woman half his age who once worked for Thomas. Things I'd uncovered by simply asking the right questions, and hiring the right forensic accountant. "This isn't just a clause, Mark. This is a time bomb." He sat very still. "You're bluffing." "I'm grieving," I said, voice cool. "And I'm pissed. And that makes me dangerous." I stood. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to walk away from any claim to Thomas's estate. You're going to release a public statement acknowledging his full ownership of the company, posthumously. You're going to vanish into whatever offshore cesspool you came from. Or what?" I leaned in. "Or I go public. With everything. The affairs. The payoffs. The way you nearly drove your own brother into bankruptcy just so you could be the man Daddy never made you. And when the board sees that?" I smiled. "They won't just fire you. They'll bury you." He didn't speak, just stared. And in that moment, I realized something terrifyingly satisfying. He was afraid of me. 3 weeks later, Mark Holloway resigned from his own company. Quietly. Without explanation. The board reinstated Thomas's legacy shares. The profits, nearly $2.4 million, were transferred to the trust in my son's names. I paid off the house. Set aside college funds. Created an emergency grant for widowed mothers in Thomas's name. And then I did something I never thought I would. I bought my parents' house. Through a proxy. At a foreclosure auction. They never saw it coming. I let them live in it for 6 more weeks, long enough for them to redecorate, repaint, plant their precious gardenias. Then I had the sheriff deliver the notice. Eviction. They called me. Screamed at me. Threatened to sue. I let them. And then I mailed them a photo of Caleb and Jonah, sitting on our front porch, beaming. Underneath, a single line. "This is what justice looks like." But even with everything reclaimed, even with the empire rebuilt from ash and betrayal, I knew there was one more thing I had to do. One final chapter. Because while my parents and Mark took from me out of greed, there was one person who betrayed me for something worse. Fear. And it was time I faced him. I didn't want to see him. Not really. But closure isn't about what you want. It's about what you need to say when the words have been stuck in your throat too long. So I booked the visit. Drove 2.5 hours in silence, my fingers tight on the wheel, heart drumming to some ancient rhythm of rage and sorrow. When the security gate buzzed open, I felt like I was walking into a memory I had worked years to forget. There, behind the glass, sat the man who started it all. Thomas's father. If you'd met him on the street, you'd think he was a kind man. A retired professor. A man who read the newspaper front to back and waved politely at neighbors. But behind that carefully ironed facade was a coldness I never learned to describe properly. Thomas never told me everything about their falling out, only that it involved money, control, and something his father called legacy management. Legacy. That word again. It haunted our marriage in quiet ways, decisions Thomas agonized over, the unspoken pressure to be better than the man who made him. I once asked Thomas why he didn't just cut ties completely. Because part of me still wants him to be proud, he had said, eyes distant. That was the part of him I never could fix. Now, here he was. Thinner. Grayer. His smile mechanical. You came, he said, as if we were old friends catching up over coffee. I sat down. I need answers. He tilted his head. About? Why you set this in motion, I said. Why you called my parents. Why you helped Mark. Why you tried to take my husband's life apart, after he was already gone. He blinked slowly, then leaned back. You don't understand legacy, he said. You think it's about grief, or love, or honor. But legacy is about control. About keeping the bloodline intact. Thomas was never supposed to marry you. I didn't flinch. He chose me. He chose us. You just couldn't stand it. You don't have the spine for the world he lived in, he said, almost sadly. You're emotional. You react. You tear things down instead of managing them quietly. Thomas was always impulsive like that. He was human, I said, my voice rising. He cared. He loved his sons. He built a life. And you tore it apart. From the shadows. His gaze didn't move. Because he needed a lesson. It was then I realized, he didn't regret anything. Not Mark's betrayal. Not manipulating my parents. Not putting Thomas through years of emotional warfare disguised as fatherhood. He believed every twisted word of it. Your lesson, I said softly, is about to get worse. He arched an eyebrow. I reached into my coat and pulled out the manila envelope. Not for court this time. But for him. Inside, photographs. Financial reports. Copies of all legal transfers that had happened in the last 8 months. The trust. The business. The foreclosure. Every stitch of what used to be his legacy now rerouted, restructured, and rewritten under one name. Mine. Congratulations, I said. Everything you built to keep power in your bloodline? It's mine now. And it's staying with me. My name. My choices. My terms. He stared at the papers, unmoving. And for the first time, his face changed. Not anger. Not defiance. Fear. You can't, he started, voice small. I already did. I stood up, the glass between us reflecting my face next to his, a mirror of everything he tried to erase. And then I said the last thing he ever heard from me. Thomas left me the keys to everything you built. And I've locked the door behind me. That night, I sat on the front porch of our house, my house, with a blanket over my knees and Jonah asleep on my shoulder. Caleb was curled up next to me, his breath soft, the way it always was after a day of running through the garden. The stars above didn't feel cold anymore. They felt like witnesses. I didn't get Thomas back. I never would. And the scars left by betrayal still traced my bones like ink that wouldn't wash off. But I won. Not because I destroyed them. But because I rebuilt us. Our home. Our future. Our truth. And in the quiet, just before I carried the boys to bed, I whispered to the sky. They thought I'd fall apart. I smiled. I hope they're still watching.